Welcome into the Fantasy Football Fellas YouTube channel. My name is Tyler Plath, and today we are breaking down our top 15 quarterback rankings and placing them into tiers based on our 2023 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. If you want to see exactly how each of us have projected these quarterbacks to perform this year, fellasdraftguide.com. You'll also see personal tier rankings for these quarterbacks, but also for running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. You'll get flex rankings of our running backs, wide receivers, tight ends combined. You'll get big boards in the future. You'll also get videos on the top 100 players in the future. fellasdraftguide.com to get your copy. It is the tool to win your fantasy leagues this year. Again, we're going through 15 quarterbacks this video. That's a lot to get through. So let's not keep you waiting and let's dive right on in. All right, starting things off here with our S-tier quarterbacks and specifically with Jalen Hurts, who comes in as our quarterback one in our consensus rankings. He's my quarterback one this year, Lucas's quarterback one, and Cameron's quarterback three. Hurts had 3,700 passing yards last year, 22 passing touchdowns, 760 rushing yards, and 13 rushing touchdowns, which was good for a quarterback three finish, but the quarterback one in fantasy points per game. It was a career year for Hurts. He finished second in fantasy points per dropback. He was fourth in quarterback rating, first in red zone carries. We saw the marriage of the rushing game and the passing game come together, and it resulted in a career year for Jalen Hurts. The question we have to ask about Hurts is, do we see some regression in his rushing touchdowns, right? Because 13 is an abnormal amount of touchdowns, and we probably should expect that to happen. Probably around 9 touchdowns, 10 touchdowns for the year, but even if that were to happen, he is still going to be a top 3 quarterback, and at bare minimum, a top 5 quarterback. He has everything you want in a fantasy football quarterback. Rushing upside, passing production, good weapons, good offensive line play. There is not a whole lot to dislike about Jalen Hurts this year. He's our quarterback one. Moving right along here to our quarterback two in our consensus rankings, Josh Allen. My quarterback two, Lucas's quarterback two, Cameron's quarterback two. Allen finished last year with 4,300 passing yards, 35 passing touchdowns. He had 770 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. Allen was first in air yards and second in QBR. But here's my favorite stat about Allen from last year. It's going to sound backwards because the stat doesn't sound great, but you'll have to let me explain. Allen was second in drop passes with 35. 35 drop passes by the Buffalo Bills last year. That's 35 missed opportunities for Josh Allen to be even more productive in the passing game. Now, let's break that down a little bit. Was it all on the receivers? Was it accuracy? Was it a mix of both? Well, here's your answer. Allen was 23rd in true completion percentage. So it's not entirely on the wide receivers, but there's some context to that 23rd finish in true completion percentage. Allen played half the season with a partially torn UCL and other tendon and muscle injuries. That's really going to affect some things. So I'll give him a pass on the true completion percentage because of that kind of injury. So we're going to get a fully healthy season from Josh Allen, which will improve his completion percentage, which means it'll improve his overall passing efficiency. Not to mention, the Bills could bring in a DeAndre Hopkins too. So he's throwing 2 guys like DeAndre Hopkins possibly, Stephon Diggs. With his rushing upside, yeah, he could finish as a quarterback one this year because of all of that. It's very possible. That's why he's in our S tier as our quarterback two. Our quarterback three, based on our consensus rankings, is Patrick Mahomes. Last season's MVP, he's my quarterback three this year, Lucas's quarterback three, and Cameron's quarterback one. As I said, the MVP from last season, 5,200 passing yards, 41 touchdowns, 350 rushing yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns. People doubted Mahomes last year. He was not a lock to finish as a top 3 option after 3 consecutive seasons finishing outside of the top 3, and he was losing Tyreek Hill. It didn't matter, though. It didn't matter one bit. He can do it again this year, too. That's the scary thing. He can do it again this year. I know the reason why I have him at 3, though, and possibly Lucas as well, is because he doesn't offer the same rushing upside as a Jalen Hurts or a Josh Allen. He makes up for it in his passing production, but you get more points for rushing in fantasy football than you do for passing. So that's why I've got Josh Allen and Jalen Hurts ahead of Mahomes. It could still be very close. And as I said, Mahomes could finish as the quarterback 1 again this year. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. I would just bet on Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts because of their rushing upside first. These 3 quarterbacks make up the S tier because it is legitimately a top 3 big 3. You can place these guys in any way you want. No one's going to disagree with you because everyone knows the elite talent that they are and the elite option that they are in fantasy football. Moving right along here to our A-tier quarterbacks and kicking things off in this tier is Joe Burrow. He's my quarterback 4, Lucas's quarterback 4, and Cam's quarterback 5. Last year, Burrow finished as the quarterback 4 with 4,500 passing yards, 36 touchdowns, with 5 rushing touchdowns. I don't think that's recognized enough. He had 5 rushing touchdowns. Joe Shiesty last year had 6 top 5 finishes and was the quarterback 4 in fantasy points per game. It all checks out where he finished last year. But I do have one question to pose about Joe Burrow this year. Could he be this year's Patrick Mahomes? And I'm not saying from an NFL perspective. I'm saying from a fantasy football perspective. And I think there's a chance. Last year, before Jamar Chase got hurt and missed weeks 8 to 12, Burrow was first in passing yards. He was 3rd in touchdowns and 2nd in rushing touchdowns. He was on pace for nearly 5,000 yards. You take that. Plus, again, his rushing touchdown production, right? 5 rushing touchdowns. We could very well be talking about a big 4 next year instead of a big 3. Everyone thinks that this Bengals offense can get even better with a fully healthy Jamar Chase, and I tend to agree with that. We could be talking about Joe Burrow in the same conversation as a Patrick Mahomes, as a Josh Allen, and Jalen Hurts when it comes to fantasy football next year. Next quarterback in our consensus rankings and in this A tier is Justin Herbert. My quarterback 5, Lucas's quarterback 5, and Cameron's quarterback 6. Lucas and I have agreed a lot on these quarterbacks so far. Herbert finished as a quarterback 11 last year with 4,700 passing yards. That should be enough reasoning why he can be a top 5 option again this year, but I'll keep breaking it down. 4,700 passing yards, 25 touchdowns. Let's recap Herbert's season even further, though, right? Quarterback 11 finish, so why we have him as a top 5 option? Well, let's take a look. Week 1, he loses Keenan Allen, and he doesn't play a full game with him until week 11. Week 2, he picks up an injury, suffering broken rib cartilage, and he plays through that injury the rest of the season. And as a quarterback, that's not a fun injury. If you keep consistently getting hit over and over and over like Herbert was, not fun. Week 3 comes around. Rashawn Slater, his all-pro left tackle, gone for the season. Not great. Not good at all, actually. Next thing that happens, he loses Mike Williams and doesn't play a full game with Mike Williams from week 9 to 13. Not great. Catching a theme here, it was not a great situation for Herbert last year. He did all that he could with his talent, right, with guys like Austin Eckler, with Joshua Palmer, with Gerald Everett. He still put up 4,700 passing yards again. But that's kind of a miracle for the situation that he was in last year. On top of the 4,700 passing yards, he threw the 2nd most attempts of all quarterbacks. He finished 2nd in passing yards, right? And 3rd in true completion percentage. There's no more denying the talent that is Herbert if there were any questions about it. This year, though, he's coming back fully healthy. I forgot the last thing. I forgot one other thing that put a damper on his season last year. He suffered a shoulder labrum tear at some point during the season that needed surgery in the offseason. Again, let me go back through that again. He loses Keenan Allen week 1 and doesn't play with him until week 11. He suffers broken rib cartilage in week 2, and he plays through that the rest of the year. He loses Rashawn Slater, his blindside tackle, in week 3. He loses Mike Williams and doesn't play with him from weeks 9 to 13. And then he tears his shoulder labrum. Not good. And he still finished with 4,700 passing yards. let's look. I'm dumbfounded by that fact. But let's just look forward. He's coming back fully healthy. Keenan Allen's coming back fully healthy. Mike Williams is coming back fully healthy. Rashawn Slater's coming back fully healthy. Austin Eckler's still in the backfield. He adds Quentin Johnson. They still have Gerald Everett. And the cherry on top, Kellen Moore is calling the shots now, who just led Dallas to a top 10 and possibly top 5, I don't remember off the top of my head, scoring offense last year. They are going to be throwing the ball all over the place. He's an easy bounce back candidate and someone that needs to be talked about more seriously and more often in the top 5 because it is a very real possibility, and I would tend to err on the side of borderline guarantee. I tried my best to not throw around the word guarantee because nothing's really a guarantee when it comes to fantasy football, but I think you knew what I meant. We're going to move right along to our quarterback 6 in our consensus rankings, Lamar Jackson. My quarterback 6, Lucas's quarterback 6, and Cameron's quarterback 4. 2,200 passing yards from Lamar last year, 17 touchdowns, along with 760 rushing yards, and only 3 rushing touchdowns. Very unlike Lamar Jackson. He finished as a quarterback 14 last year. He did only play in 12 games, so there is kind of a silver lining there. Lamar was the quarterback 6 in fantasy points per game. And he also had 2 games, and they happened to be back-to-back, when he scored 40 or more fantasy points. There's a lot of optimism when it comes to Lamar Jackson this year, right? He's coming back fully healthy. He recently signed a big extension, so he's staying for a while. He gets a needed offensive coordinator change with Todd Monken coming in, replacing Greg Roman. And Monken should help improve the efficiency and production of the offense. It was never really going to happen with Greg Roman because he called the 28th fewest team pass plays per game. That was never going to be a super productive passing offense. The last reason, though, is one of the more exciting reasons out of those, or I should say the most exciting out of those. Lamar arguably has the most weapons at his disposal in his entire career. He has Rashad Bateman coming back from his foot injury. There are rumblings that it's not looking great, but until then, he should be coming back fully healthy. They added first-round rookie Zay Flowers, and oh yeah, they signed Odell Beckham Jr. Those 3 with Mark Andrews. That is the most weapons that Lamar has ever had in Baltimore. So you take all those things, right? Improved weapon room, wide receivers. He gets an offensive coordinator change with Todd Monken coming in, and he's fully healthy, plus his rushing upside. Lamar is a sweet option this year, and he's also like Justin Herbert in the sense that he's a very easy bounce back candidate this year and could very easily finish in the top 5. Again, because his rushing upside is different to a guy like Justin Herbert, to a guy like Joe Burrow. He's another top 5 guy. He's just outside of my top 6 because I don't think there's enough passing volume to get him or to catapult him into the top 5 when there are guys like Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert. But Lamar is going to be a very, very good option this year. 2 more quarterbacks to get through in this A tier, and we're going to start with Justin Fields, the quarterback 6 from last year, and he's our consensus quarterback 7. The quarterback 7 in each of our personal rankings. Justin Fields finished last year with 17 passing touchdowns, but with 1,100 rushing yards and 8 rushing touchdowns. Incredible rushing numbers, incredible rushing games from Fields last year. A lot of people are expecting him to break out in the passing game this year, right? The Bears bring in DJ Moore. They're continuously building out the offensive line. There's no real threat in the backfield, right? Between the 3-headed monster that is Roschon Johnson, Deontay Foreman, and Khalil Herbert. Kind of forces Fields to throw the ball or play a little more hero ball probably, right? Throwing the ball a little bit more, rushing a little bit more. But we need to be honest about a couple things. First thing is that the Bears sheltered him from throwing the ball last year. Fields, threw the ball only 318 times. That was 27th of all quarterbacks. He was 32nd in team pass plays per game, 27th in pace of play. Not great. Those will improve this year. Don't get me wrong. Those will get better, right? As I said, DJ Moore coming in, better offensive line play. It will get better. But how much better does it get? That's the question that we have to ask. The second thing we need to be honest about is the rushing production is probably going to come back down a little bit, okay? I don't think it's a lock to see another 1,000-yard rushing season from Fields. We could definitely see 6, 7, 8 rushing touchdowns again, but I'm expecting 800, 900 rushing yards, which is still great. But how much better does it get in the passing game? Because if it skyrockets, well, then he's top 5 easy. But I don't think you go from 27th in pass attempts to top 15 over one off season. I don't think that happens. So really the best way to explain how I feel about Justin Fields this year is I think this season is going to be more of a return to the median season than it is a breakout season for Justin Fields. That sounds very pessimistic, and I want to reassure you, he is still a very good option in fantasy football. Again, he's our quarterback 7 in our consensus rankings, finished as a quarterback 6 last year. He is still a very good option. But we need to pump the brakes on breakout because I think we're probably still about a year out from that actually happening. Last quarterback in this A tier is our consensus quarterback 8, Trevor Lawrence. And I can already hear you asking, what? Trevor Lawrence is an A tier fantasy quarterback? What? How? What? Let me explain. Let me explain. He's my quarterback 8 this year. Lucas's quarterback 9 and Cameron's quarterback 8. Lawrence finished as the quarterback 8 last year with 4,100 passing yards, 25 touchdowns, along with just shy of 300 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Last year was the bounce back year after what we saw Lawrence's rookie year with Urban Meyer. Wasn't pretty. But year 2, much, much better. He had 8 top 10 weekly finishes, and 5 of those were inside the top 5. If it's probably better than a bounce back, honestly. But from what we saw rookie year, it's a bounce back. I think Trevor Lawrence can take another step forward this year. The Jaguars are bringing in Calvin Ridley. I should say have brought in Calvin Ridley already. Year 2 under Doug Peterson. And the 10th best pass blocking offensive line per PFF. All of these things just help boost Lawrence even more going into his 3rd year in the NFL. And we also need to remember, this is the same guy that was called the greatest quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck. So if anything, what we saw last year is probably just scratching the surface of what is to come for Trevor Lawrence. In my projections, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, Justin Fields, and Trevor Lawrence are all separated by a total of 7 fantasy points. It's close. That's why I put him into the A tier. I can understand an argument to put him down in the B tier, but I think with the step forward, Lawrence could be in the A tier next year. But I'm going to get ahead of it a year early and say that it happens this year. I have Lawrence projected for 329 total fantasy points. That's about 19.3 per game compared to 303 last year that he had, which was about 17.9 fantasy points per game. I'm expecting big things from the Jaguars this year. Is there a world where he finishes higher than the quarterback 8? I think so. Is it more than likely, less than likely? Probably less than likely, but as I said, there is a path. There is a world where this can happen, and I think it can happen this year. That finishes out our A-tier quarterbacks, and we're going to move on to our B-tier quarterbacks, where there are only 2 quarterbacks, and the first is Deshaun Watson. He's our consensus quarterback 9. He's my quarterback 9. Lucas's quarterback 8. And Cameron's quarterback 9. Last year, he missed half the season due to suspension, came back, finished with 1,100 passing yards, 7 touchdowns, along with 175 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown. It wasn't the prettiest return for Watson, and people expected it, right? You don't play football in over a year and a half as a quarterback in the National Football League. It's not going to be a walk in the park. And there was some rust. There was a good amount of rust. But no one really expected Watson to hit the ground running. Deshaun Watson, finds himself in the B tier because we have to acknowledge what was, but we have to also acknowledge where we find ourselves today. And what I mean by that is what was a top 5 quarterback in fantasy football. 2018, 4,100 passing yards, 26 touchdowns, 550 rushing yards, 5 rushing touchdowns. A quarterback 4 finish that year. In 2019, 3,800 passing yards, 26 passing touchdowns, 400 rushing yards, and 7 rushing touchdowns. The quarterback 5 that year. And in 2020, 4,800 passing yards, 33 touchdowns, just shy of 450 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. The quarterback 5 that year. That's what was a consistent top 5 fantasy quarterback. But we can't expect those numbers this year. We can maybe expect those numbers next year. But for this year, I don't think we can expect those kind of numbers. Maybe he gets up to that kind of pace by the end of this season, but I'm expecting the first couple weeks of this season to still be a bit rusty. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing the old Deshaun Watson by the end of the season. You know the talent that is Deshaun Watson. It's a top 5 quarterback in the league. And if it's not top 5, it's certainly a top 10 quarterback. It'll be interesting to see exactly how this Cleveland offense operates. You have Nick Chubb in the backfield, Amari Cooper, you bring in Elijah Moore, you have David Njoku, Donovan Peoples-Jones is someone that they like over there, but then they also have guys like Cedric Tillman that they took in the draft. As I said, it'll be interesting to see how it all works together and stuff. I'm still expecting this offense to go through the run. Kevin Stefanski, with his background, I think it's going to go through the run game first. Maybe it builds off a play action. Who knows how Stefanski is going to build this offense out. There's a ton of talent. And that's probably the most exciting thing about Deshaun Watson is that if you buy in on Deshaun Watson, you're buying in on the talent of the Browns offense. He's a top 10 option because of that and the talent that he has. Maybe it's a slow start to the beginning of the season. He may be a buy low candidate at some point this season. But I do expect by the end of the season, we're going to start seeing shades of the old Deshaun Watson, and that's a very exciting thing. Last quarterback that we have in the B tier is Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott. He's my quarterback 12, and I'll explain why in a second. Lucas's quarterback 10, and Cameron's quarterback 11. And Prescott is our consensus quarterback 10. Last year, despite missing some time, Dak finished with just over 2,800 passing yards, 23 touchdowns, but had 15 interceptions, and I believe it was only 12 games that he played last year, so he was averaging over an interception a game, which is not good. It was a quarterback 18 finish for Dak last year. But when Dak came back from his injury, from his thumb fracture to be exact, he was the quarterback 6 until the end of the season, despite all the turnover problems. He was 8th in passing yards. He was 3rd in touchdowns. But again, he was 1st in interceptions. Not great. But again, quarterback 6. That's pretty good for missing 5 games at the beginning of the season. Again, I'm the lowest on Dak, so let me explain why I have him the lowest out of the 3 of us. I'll express my concerns. And it really kind of comes from the idea that I just don't think Dak is going to find that kind of success this year. I've harped on the turnover issue too much already. He had 16 total turnovers, 15 interceptions, 1 fumble in 12 games. Not great. Mike McCarthy is the other reason. Mike McCarthy has already come out this offseason, even before the draft, and was very, very vocal about running the ball more this year. Wasn't too pleased with Kellen Moore wanting to throw it all the time, so he wants to run the ball more. And I partially think that is Mike McCarthy, but at the same time, I wonder if that's Mike McCarthy trying to protect his offense a little bit after his quarterback threw 15 interceptions. The Brian Schottenheimer narrative can be blown out of proportion sometimes. Like, Schottenheimer was successful in Seattle. It was very successful. But it was based on the run game first. That's why Mike McCarthy promoted Schottenheimer to the offensive coordinator, because they both believe in the run game first. That's why I'm so high on Tony Pollard this year. The last point about Dak Prescott was really best explained by Andy Holloway of the Fantasy Footballers. If Kellen Moore is a huge add for the Chargers, it's a huge loss for the Dallas Cowboys. My rankings signal that. Losing losing Kellen Moore. Yes, you get Brandon Cooks to add to your weapons. Michael Gallup is going to be healthy. CeeDee Lamb, Tony Pollard, but you lose Dalton Schultz, who was kind of his safety blanket last year. Turnovers, wanting to run the ball more. I think there's a lot working against Dak Prescott to find the kind of success that he saw last year. He's going to be a good fantasy option, right? If you punt on quarterback, Dak is going to be someone that you want to target later. But I don't know how much of a ceiling he has. He may have a floor, but I don't know how much of a ceiling he has, and that's why he's my quarterback 12. But as our consensus quarterback 10, I also completely understand it. And who knows? By the time we get closer and closer to the season, Dak may sneak up my rankings just a little bit. Maybe 12 is a little harsh right now, but I need to see a little bit more positivity, optimism, good news for me to bump Dak up in my own rankings, which will bump him up in our consensus rankings. We are moving on to our C tier quarterbacks, starting with our consensus quarterback 11, Captain Kirk Cousins. He's my quarterback 13, Lucas's quarterback 12, and Cameron's quarterback 10. Last year, as the quarterback 7 in fantasy football, quarterback 7 last year, Kirk finished with just over 4,500 passing yards, had 29 touchdowns, and he also had 2 rushing touchdowns, or kind of fluky, but they were so fun to watch as a Vikings fan because that never happens. A lot of that success can be credited to Kevin O'Connell. He helped Kirk produce his highest passing yard total since 2016. Had Kirk throw the most attempts in his career. The ball was in Kirk's hands way more than it has in his career. The Vikings were the 7th highest scoring offense last season, which also helps out Kirk and with every other Vikings player. Kirk was 4th in passing yards. He was 3rd in air yards. He was 1st in deep ball accuracy. He was 3rd in team pass plays per game. It's a situation that is hard for a quarterback to not thrive in. My favorite stat from Kirk, he was 2nd in red zone attempts. Basically saying there's room for more touchdowns this year. He has big play capability based on his air yards. Now you add in a guy like Jordan Addison, who is a very good downfield threat. What is there not to like about Kirk Cousins this year? And you'll see my personal ranking at quarterback 13 go, really? Even with all the optimism that you have based on last year with Kirk Cousins, he just has 0 rushing upside. Like, 0 rushing upside. Yes, he had 2 rushing touchdowns last year, but you can't bank on those this year again. One was a 15-yard scamper against the Cardinals, okay? That's not Kirk Cousins' game. Maybe he escapes the pocket a little bit more, but he is not a running quarterback by any means. And all the quarterbacks ahead of him, Dak Prescott, Deshaun Watson, all the A-tier quarterbacks, they all have some kind of rushing production to their name. Even if it is just shy of 300 yards and 4 or 5 rushing touchdowns. That's more than what Kirk will do in a single season. Kirk is going to produce like a pocket passing quarterback because that's what he is first, but also that's the offense that he's in, and that's the offense that they have built in Minnesota. He is just like all the other guys in this tier. We have 3 other quarterbacks in this tier. These quarterbacks are the quarterbacks to target if you punt on quarterback, right? And you miss out on a Dak Prescott, you miss out on a Deshaun Watson. Kirk is someone that you should target just because of the potential for this offense to be one of the highest scoring offenses in the league this upcoming season. Moving on to our quarterback 12 in our consensus rankings, it is Danny Dimes. You heard me. Daniel Jones is a top 12 quarterback in our consensus rankings. He's my quarterback 10, Lucas's quarterback 11, and Cam has him buried. Quarterback 14. What? Hell, what? The quarterback 9 from last year, your quarterback 14? I kid and I joke because I'm pretty sure I've got someone ranked way lower than where they finished last year. So I kid. Looking at last year from Daniel Jones, 3,200 passing yards, 15 passing touchdowns, but had 700 rushing yards and 7 rushing touchdowns. And as you heard me say, I have him as my quarterback 10. I have him as my quarterback 10 ahead of a Kirk Cousins, ahead of a guy like Dak Prescott. Yeah, ahead of Dak Prescott. There's a couple reasons why I've got Daniel Jones as a top 10 quarterback this year. First is Brian Daboll, okay? Daboll rejuvenated Danny Dimes' career, and he helped him to the best true completion percentage of all quarterbacks. He ranked first in true completion percentage. And Danny Dimes finished 7th in QBR, best in his career by far. Second reason, he has new weapons this year, and not just new, but more weapons this year. Sterling Shepard and Wan'Dale Robinson missed significant time last year. They will be back in the mix. It remains to be seen just how much they'll be in the mix, but they are back in the mix. Isaiah Hodgins and Darius Slayton filled in their place, performed not super great, but serviceable. They are back this year as well. So you've got 4 returning weapons, plus the addition of Paris Campbell. And let me remind you, Paris Campbell finished inside the top 15 wide receivers 3 times last year during the season. They then added a rookie in Jalen Hyatt in the 3rd round. And by far the biggest name, they traded for Darren Waller. Yeah, that Darren Waller, who has finished as a top 3 tight end in fantasy football before. Last reason, Danny Dimes' rushing metrics are phenomenal. He finished inside the top 5 in the following stat categories: carries per game, red zone carries per game, rushing yards, rush yards per game, and rushing touchdowns. Do we see some regression in those? That's the question that we should ask, and it's quite possible. But what we know about Brian Daboll, right, based on his time in Buffalo, he likes to utilize his quarterback's mobility. So again, let me recap the reasons why I've got him as a top 10 quarterback. 1, the Brian Daboll effect, right? Helped rejuvenate his career. All the weapons that Danny Dimes has this year: Sterling Shepard, Wan'Dale Robinson, Isaiah Hodgins, Darius Slayton, Paris Campbell, Jalen Hyatt, and Darren Waller. Right? Darren Waller is head and shoulders ahead of the rest of those guys. But when you look at the wide receiver room that the Giants have this year, it is significantly better than what he had last year. And lastly, all of his rushing metrics, his rushing upside, his rushing production, whatever you want to call it. Okay? All of those things give me high hopes for Danny Dimes this season. And I'm betting that he finishes inside the top 12. He did last year as a quarterback 9. He finished as a top 10 quarterback last year. That upside is legitimate in my opinion. And we could see a very different Daniel Jones this year and a much better fantasy option than what we have seen earlier in his career. Next quarterback that we have in the B tier is Dolphins quarterback Tua Tagovailoa, my quarterback 11 this year. I am way higher on Tua than Lucas and Cameron. Tua is Lucas's quarterback 14, and Cameron has Tua as his quarterback 16. 16! But I can't really be freaking out when I'm the outlier out of the three of us, putting him as my quarterback 11. 13 games last year, right? It was a very hard season to watch from Tua, right? Just dealing with his injuries and stuff. But Tua did finish with 3,500 passing yards and 25 touchdowns in those 13 games. Tua's extrapolated stats, he would have finished with 4,800 passing yards, 35 touchdowns. He would have been the quarterback 6 last year. Mike McDaniel did something to that offense that it was night and day. It was a night and day difference from what we had seen the past couple years with Tua. Tua was third in QBR last year. He was third in expected points added. He was second in red zone completion percentage. He was first in deep ball completion percentage, first in yards per attempt. Helps when you've got guys like Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill that you're throwing to, but still, that's also based on the system that Mike McDaniel brought to Miami. This offense thrives on efficiency, and betting on efficiency is kind of risky when it comes to fantasy football because efficiency is never the same from year 1 to year 2. It always changes. It either improves or takes a hit, right? Duh. That's how things work. But I am going to bet that this Miami team and offense gets better with the efficiency. If anything, it stays relatively the same. And I know I just said it doesn't really stay the same. Relative. It's all relative, okay? I trust Mike McDaniel. I like the weapons that Tua has at his disposal with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Both are going as top 12 fantasy options on Underdog Fantasy. Jalen Waddle has so much talent, so much potential. You know who Tyreek Hill is. This team is going to be very good this year. The defense is going to be better. The offense, we know how good the offense was last year before Tua got hurt. So imagine a fully healthy season of Tua. That's why he is my quarterback 11. Last quarterback that we have in the C tier, Geno Smith. The guy who didn't write back. He's my quarterback 15. Don't get mad. Lucas is quarterback 13 and Cam's quarterback 12. I have been on record saying, why is Geno Smith going outside the top 10, top 12? And I look like a complete hypocrite when I have him as my quarterback 15. But I can reassure you, he's going to get back up in my rankings somehow, some way. Maybe he finds his way ahead of Kirk, maybe ahead of Tua, maybe ahead of Dak. 15 is too low. I will fully admit that. The quarterback 5 from last year. I don't think we're going to see such a drastic regression, right? To see the quarterback 5 from last year finished as the quarterback 15. That's why we use consensus rankings. He's our quarterback 14. Geno finished last year with just a little under 4,300 yards, 30 passing touchdowns, along with 366 rushing yards. He was one of, if not the biggest surprise last year in fantasy football. He was virtually going undrafted last year. Pretty much a league winner. Pretty much. Geno was 4th in true completion percentage. He was 5th in deep ball completion percentage. He was 8th in quarterback carries and rushing yards. Now he adds JSN to his weapon arsenal. There's not a lot to dislike when you look at it like that. But here are the concerns for me when it comes to Geno. He was 17th in game script with a negative 1.18, and a negative value indicates that the team is more often playing from behind or in closer games than big leads. Seattle got better on defense this offseason. So I'm expecting that game script to improve, and when I say improve, become more of a positive value. Geno was first in danger plays last year in interceptable passes. Not good. He finished with 11 interceptions, and it could have been more. I'm not going to sit here and say he was lucky because I'm not an NFL quarterback. I have no idea how difficult that is. Even though everyone says how difficult it is, I have no idea how difficult it is. But it could have been more disastrous than we want to admit. That's 2 reasons. Game script, danger plays, interceptable passes. The third reason, the addition of Zach Charbonnet. And yes, I just talked about JSN being a great addition for Geno, but probably is canceled out by the addition of Zach Charbonnet. I'm not saying that it's a talent thing or anything. The addition of Zach Charbonnet signals an intention to run the ball more in Seattle. That's what it means. So Kenneth Walker in the backfield with Zach Charbonnet. It may take the ball out of Geno's hands a little bit more than we want to see. And the fourth reason, he loses his quarterback coach, Dave Canales, who is now the offensive coordinator in Tampa Bay. This is probably the least worrisome reason out of the 4, but it has to mean something. Again, negative game script, first in danger plays and interceptable passes, the addition of Zach Charbonnet. Maybe the addition of Zach Charbonnet is to maybe not have Geno finish first in danger plays and interceptable passes. Sure, but that takes the ball out of Geno's hands. As I said before, quarterback 15 is probably too harsh on Geno. He was the quarterback 8 in fantasy points per game. With guys like Lamar, Kyler, Dak, Tua, Deshaun Watson missing time, and with a Justin Herbert who figures to rebound this year, that's 6 quarterbacks who will be pushing for better finishes than last year. So we're looking at the quarterback 5, but those 6 quarterbacks, if they finish ahead of Geno, last year, Geno is then the quarterback 11. That's why I'm a little lower on Geno Smith. Again, I will admit, I'm probably too low. But it's not completely absurd in my opinion. I think there are legitimate reasons why he is going to be lower than what we saw from last year. That finishes out the C tier, and we move to our last quarterback in our consensus rankings, the quarterback 15, Anthony Richardson, who is the one and only quarterback in the D tier. He's my quarterback 14, Lucas's quarterback 16, and Cam's quarterback 15. And right off the rip, Lucas won't like this. Cameron may not like this either. We may be too low on Anthony Richardson. Let's take a look at all rookie quarterbacks with at least 480 rushing yards. There have been only 8 quarterbacks to rush for at least 480 rushing yards in their rookie season. 2018 RG3 had 815 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns. He had 3,200 passing yards, 20 touchdowns, He was a quarterback 5 that year. Back in 2011, Cam Newton, 700 rushing yards, 14 rushing touchdowns. Over 4,000 passing yards, 21 touchdowns. He was the quarterback 3 that year. 2018 Lamar Jackson. In just 11 games, Lamar finished with just under 700 rushing yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. Had 1,200 yards and 6 touchdowns if you care about the passing stats. 2018 Josh Allen, 630 rushing yards, 8 rushing touchdowns with 2,000 passing yards and 10 passing touchdowns in only 12 games. The quarterback 21, and Lamar was the quarterback 29, by the way, but again, shortened sample size. 2006, Vince Young, 550 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns, just shy of 2,200 passing yards, 12 passing touchdowns. The quarterback 9 in 2006. 2019, 540 rushing yards for Kyler Murray. 4 rushing touchdowns with 3,700 passing yards and 20 passing touchdowns. The quarterback 7 that year. We go all the way back to 1961 to find our next quarterback, who is Billy Kilmer of the San Francisco 49ers. Fantasy wasn't active at that point. We're going to move right along. Last quarterback, 2012, Russell Wilson. 489 rushing yards, 4 rushing touchdowns with 3,100 passing yards and 26 passing touchdowns. The quarterback 11 that year. After extrapolating everyone's stats to their full season, the averages of those 7 quarterbacks, even though there's 8, I'm not including Billy Kilmer. Of those 7 quarterbacks, the averages come out to be 2,900 yards. Just shy of 3,000 yards. 7 touchdowns, 11 interceptions, 683 rushing yards, and 8 touchdowns. In a full 17-game season, based on their points per game from that average stat line, that would be the quarterback 9 last year. Even if instead of 17 passing touchdowns, it was 15, it's the quarterback 10 last year. I'm not saying that's what he'll produce this year. I'm not saying that's what we should expect from Anthony Richardson this year. I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that he's top 10, heck, even top 12. But what I am saying is that there is a path to a finish in the top 12 for Anthony Richardson because of his mobility, because of untapped arm potential that new head coach Shane Steichen can mold, can bring out of him. That'll finish this episode of the Fantasy Football Fellas. If you watched all the way to this point, give this like a video, drop it down in the comments that you made it this far, and tell me who the quarterback you're targeting this year. Because for me, I'll be honest, it's Justin Herbert. Thanks for tuning in. We will be back next week with our top 12 tight end rankings and tier rankings, but we will also be posting the Fantasy Football Fellas podcast that you will see earlier on in the week. Again, thanks for tuning in, and we will see you later.